Workers who got their bosses fired. How? The CEO publicly praised me for completing a task that my boss had struggled with, so my boss retaliated by forwarding all of his tasks to me in an effort to overwhelm me with work. I actually found his job pretty manageable, which the CEO also noticed and fired him, giving me his job and office. Well, that backfired horribly for him. Management was giving an injured worker not wanting to pay him, accusing him of gold bricking. Worker said, "Tell you what, do the right thing here or you will be sorry." Management said, "Take your best shot." Worker called the EPA and APCD, told them where to find the logs that showed discrepancies in toxic material storage and usage. Sheriff's deputies showed up and raided the offices. Field supervisors from 10 years ago that had retired got subpoenaed. It was epic. Cost the company massively in fines and remediation. All because you wanted to F with one poor bastard. Never, ever, never F over the guy who knows where the real books are. I took a cell phone video of her taking money from the safe and putting it in her wallet. I knew she was doing it, and I also knew that the moment it came out that money was missing she'd blame it on me. She was so stupid that she didn't realize she should stop doing that while I was standing 10 feet away with my phone out and facing her. I got my boss disbarred. He was an attorney who was a serial abuser of female clients' criminal defendants. He got away with it for over 20 years and preyed upon at least 12 different victims. The Office of Attorney Regulation censured him multiple times for other offenses, like being late to pay his annual bar fees. But even though they knew about at least 5 of the victims, they wouldn't disbar him. I discovered that the Office of Attorney Regulation decides whether to pursue an action against an attorney based on a cost-benefit analysis. I gathered as much documentation of everything as I could, over a 6-month period. I've told it before. Not fired but transferred. Had a squad leader make us all stand out in the Missouri winter soaking wet until someone volunteered for weekend duty. I told him I had previous cold weather injuries. Frostbite. He ignored it. The corporal saw my blue feet when I took off my boots and sent me to the aid station. The doctor lost his shit. That squad leader was in another company the next day. It's not as justice bonering as getting in a hole fired, but it's the army that's not gonna happen. Advanced through the company through hard work and dedication and slowly began to usurp the boss's duties and responsibilities. Eventually the owner realized what a lazy schmuck the old boss was and laid him off. A week later I got a new title and a 35% raise. If only it worked out this way all the time. It seems the more I learn and the more work I take on, the more I am taken advantage of and I never get compensated accordingly. By doing so much it started an investigation into what they were actually doing during fire day. Officially she was fired for sending nudes through corporate email, but the only reason they were tracking her email was to understand what she was spending her time on. Turns out it was an affair. Was working maintenance at an ice rink. The rule for anyone who knows how an ice rink works is if the Zamboni doors open, you get the F off the ice. So Mayhole decided to ignore the fact that they were open and that I was standing in the doorway, and decided to rip off one last slap shot. The puck bounced off the glass and hit me in the head. I was okay, but reported it to my boss, because we have to fill out an incident report for things like that. The boss asked, "Are you okay?" I said I feel okay. Then he responded with, "Well, we don't really have to report it then, do we?" I reminded him of the protocol, but it was clear he didn't want to do it. Since he wouldn't do it, I sent a descriptive email of the incident up to the administration, because I felt there should be some sort of documentation paper trail in case God forbid I ended up having a brain hemorrhage or something a few days later. The boss was fired by my next shift. I quit because I was sick of her sh. On my way home the company's president called to talk to me about what had happened. He offered me 2 weeks of paid vacation, extra vacation on top of the 5 weeks I already received, and promised she would be gone when I came back. It was my supervisor. It got to the point that I had decided to quit. I had my resignation letter in my purse, but decided to let his boss know why I was quitting. Supervisor would talk about all the people on our team constantly, but only behind their backs. I got so sick of telling him to cut it out. My husband and I happened to work at the same place, different departments, and my supervisor would make inappropriate comments, asking what hotel we picked for our afternoon delight, sh like that. It was so bloody uncomfortable. Apart from this, he spent most of his supervising time outside smoking. Problem was, supervisor was one of the guys and I was the only girl. Turns out his boss was disgusted. Told his boss, who lost his mind. They started an investigation which took 3 days. They interviewed staff, they corroborated what I said. They checked the security cameras. Saw he was spending most of his workday outside smoking. And was fired. When he was told, he guessed, wasn't hard. That I was the person who complained and tried to get to me to apologize that I took it the wrong way. The best feeling was my co-workers surrounding me as he was wailed out. That was a lovely ending to it all. Proved he didn't know how to do his job and was just passing my work off as his. Mine is pretty pedestrian, but very satisfying. I was working in a garden center. I'd been there a long time and was woefully overqualified for the job I'd been doing, and was therefore very valuable in that position. Think ops manager skills at admin assistant position and pay. We lost our sales manager 1 year and corporate hired a new one. Let's call her Flora. She was a real piece of work. I don't know what her interview looked like, but in person she was instantly and constantly rude and strident and mean and curt and dismissive in that attention-seeking brand of lazy where she threw her weight around without cause, talked sh about anyone not in the room, and collected 75% of the credit for 5% of the work. She had some knowledge, I guess, but it's way easier to teach a competent manager how to grow flowers than it is to teach an a-hole horticulturist how to be a human being. Anyway, for whatever reason, corporate loved her, so she stayed. What with one thing and another, I got another job. This process was slightly accelerated by Flora, but only a little. I'd been looking for some time, mostly waiting for the right opportunity. When I gave my 2 weeks notice, I got an email the next day scheduling my exit interview with the head of HR. Now, my position didn't get exit interviews, only managers, and sometimes department supervisors did, and everyone at my store knew why I was leaving, so there was literally no reason for the store manager to pull strings to get me one, and he never said anything about it, but I knew. He set it up so I could tell the head of HR, a man I was very friendly with, that I was leaving because of Flora, and I did. I just laid into her. I said that Flora was the only reason I was leaving after almost 10 years with the company, during which time I wrote the company's health and safety program, trained almost every other person who did my job at other stores, made spreadsheets that got used company-wide, as well as setting audit records that still stand to this day, and all for a few pennies over minimum wage. I said I was going because she was the worst and I couldn't take it anymore. I found out later she was let go. I was thanked by most of my old workmates. My manager never said a word about it to me then, or since. He was a real OG. He grabbed the back of my neck and said, "If you ever say I'm wrong in front of a customer again, I will beat your A." I went to the GM and told him, and my supervisor was relieved of his duties about 5 minutes later. Not my story but my mother's. I watched on the sidelines as a teenager. My mother's job was basically a professional fundraiser. I really don't know what else to call it. People came to her for help raise money for non-profits or other foundations that needed it. This was a long time ago, before social workers were more of a mandatory thing at high schools. My high school was very poor and did not have one. So my mother took it upon herself to set up a fundraiser to pay the salary of a social worker so my high school could have one. After raising all the money, she went to talk to the principal, who flat out refused to take any of it and said the position just wasn't necessary. My mother was pretty upset and just decided she would donate the money to supplies or something like that. I honestly have no idea what she did with it, but it did go to some sort of charity. After a few months, at a Christmas party, the superintendent of all the public schools in the area was at the same party and he struck up a conversation with my mother. After some small talk, my mother said that it was such a shame that principal didn't take the money for the social worker's position. The superintendent was dumbstruck and then told her that he had ordered principal to find funding for that position, and when superintendent asked him about it, he replied with, "No one is interested in that and we just couldn't get the money for it." Needless to say, he lost his position, and whenever we came back from the holiday break, the school was hiring for his position. I was an intern at a tech company, and in a one-on-one mentorship meeting, my boss asked me what skill set I wanted to pursue in the future. I said that I wanted to do back-end work, This was a programming internship. He replied and said girls aren't smart enough for that type of work. How about we put you on the QA path? You'll do better there. At the time I was so stunned that I just repeated quietly that I wanted to do back-end work. The meeting awkwardly ended after that. I always thought that I would be courageous in the face of blatant sexism if it ever happened to me, but instead, I was silent because I was a 23-year-old who really needed that internship to turn into a real job. Fast forward a couple weeks and I was out to lunch with a few co-workers who brought along a lady who had worked at the company for years. She'd been out on contract for a while, so I hadn't met her yet. Everyone was talking about the boss and some of the stuff he had done or said to them, mostly just rude things. So I took a chance and mentioned what happened in that meeting. She said she'd take care of it. Within a few days he was fired by the big boss. I went on my first contract doing back-end work about a month later and I loved it. As I understand it, I was not the first person to have serious complaints about him. Just the last person. For a while I was a project manager who got moved around from project to project as a fixer. I was moved to a project where the customer just could not be satisfied. No matter how many people, how much attention, how we bent over for them. Our programs director, who should have been our advocate, would not manage the customer and instead just hammered his employees to do more. People on our team were being let go due to failure or quitting outright due to burnout. And he was complaining that he couldn't get good people. Because of my sort of special position as general dog's body, I happened to have the ear of our VP, and this project came up in casual conversation. I mentioned that it seemed funny that if the director was doing his job, how so many employees that we knew by fact and reputation were good employees had failed. A week later I heard that the director had been let go, and nothing of value was lost. My mother got this done. She worked for a starting company and her boss really needed her help. Because the boss wanted my father to invest, he owns a couple of companies. My mother would get a job as a second-rank CEO, right under the women she got fired. In fact, the boss kept treating her like so she told my father. My father told the other investors and all three of them cancelled the deal. They set up the same kind of company with my mom as only CEO. All people who worked for that former boss left and began working at the new company. Our manager spent a whole shift in the office watching us on camera, and if we so much as stopped to talk to each other she'd come out and yell at us to get back to work. She was completely immature. One time I left my water bottle at the front counter and my co-worker had to stop her from purposefully throwing it away. She would make up rules on the spot if she didn't like something someone did. I could go on. She was a terrible, unfriendly, hypocritical, mean manager. Honestly, we all just went to the owners and told them everything and how it made us feel. They got HR involved and got her fired and found out she may have been stealing or giving away product. It was such a relief. If you work for a small business, just be honest with the owners if management isn't family.